Imagine walking into a gold rush camp in California in 1873. The dust is everywhere. The men are filthy. Their clothes are torn at the pockets, ripped at the seams, falling apart after only weeks in the mines. A tailor in Nevada is staring at a pile of broken trousers, and he's just had an idea that will quietly conquer the world. He doesn't know it yet, but the thing he's about to invent will end up on the legs of cowboys, presidents, rock stars, rebels, factory workers, fashion models, and roughly half the human beings alive today. Now look down at what you're wearing. There's a good chance you're wearing them right now, or they're folded in your closet, or they're lying on the floor where you dropped them last night. Jeans, the most ordinary piece of clothing on the planet, and the most extraordinary. I'm your guide through hidden history, and this is the story of how a pair of work pants for broke miners became the single most worn garment in human history. This is the hidden history of jeans. For most of human history, what you wore told everyone exactly who you were. Peasants wore wool, nobles wore silk, soldiers wore leather. Your clothes were a uniform that announced your class, your job, your worth, the second you walked into a room. There was no such thing as casual. There was no such thing as universal. A king and a farmer didn't share a single thread in common. And then jeans happened, and the rules collapsed. But here's the thing most people don't realize. The story of jeans doesn't begin in America. It doesn't begin with Levi Strauss. It begins centuries earlier, in two small port cities on opposite sides of Europe, and almost nobody knows their names. Around the 1500s, in the Italian city of Genoa, sailors needed tough trousers. Trousers that could handle salt water, rope burns, and months at sea without falling apart. The local weavers made them from a heavy cotton blend, dyed deep blue with indigo. The French had a name for these Genoese sailors and their pants. They called them gen. Say it out loud. Jeans. That word, jeans, isn't English. It's a French mispronunciation of an Italian city. Meanwhile, across the border in the French town of Nimes, another group of weavers was trying to copy a popular Italian fabric called serge. They didn't quite get it right. What they made instead was tougher, stiffer, and woven with a clever diagonal pattern that made it almost impossible to tear. They called it serge denim. Fabric from Nîmes. Say that out loud too. Denim. Denim. So before jeans were ever American, before they were ever rebellious, before they were ever cool, they were already named. Jeans. Denim. Two cities. Two accidents of language. And almost 500 years before anyone would put them together. By the 1700s, denim and jean cloth were being exported across Europe. Slave plantations in the American colonies used it to clothe enslaved workers because it was cheap and almost impossible to destroy. That part of the story rarely gets told, but it matters. Because before denim was a symbol of freedom, it was a uniform of forced labor. The fabric was tough, the dye was forgiving, stains disappeared into the indigo. Wear made it softer instead of weaker. It was perfect for people who had to work and work and work some more. But denim was still just fabric. It wasn't jeans. Not yet. To become jeans, it needed two more ingredients: a gold rush and an immigrant. In 1853, a 24-year-old German immigrant named Levi Strauss arrived in San Francisco. He wasn't a tailor. He wasn't a weaver. He wasn't even particularly ambitious. He was a dry goods salesman. He sold thread, buttons, blankets, and rolls of fabric to the miners flooding into California chasing gold. And those miners had a problem. Their pants kept exploding. Imagine swinging a pickaxe 10 hours a day with your pockets full of rocks and ore samples. Imagine kneeling in cold rivers panning for gold from sunrise to sunset. Imagine sleeping in your clothes for weeks because there's no time to change. The pants of the 1850s simply weren't built for that life. They split at the crotch. They burst at the pockets. They tore everywhere a man bent, lifted, or carried. Levi Strauss had plenty of denim. He had plenty of customers. But he didn't have the idea that would change everything. That came from a customer of his named Jacob Davis, a tailor working out of Reno, Nevada. Davis kept getting the same complaint from his clients. The pockets keep ripping. The pockets keep ripping. The pockets keep ripping. One day in 1870, a woman walked into his shop and asked him to make her woodcutter husband a pair of trousers that wouldn't fall apart. Davis looked at the metal rivets he used to fasten harnesses and saddles, and he had an idea. He hammered copper rivets into the corners of the pockets and the base of the fly, the weakest points, the places that always ripped first. The pants didn't rip. They wouldn't rip. Word spread through the mines like wildfire. Davis couldn't keep up with demand. But he was a one-man shop with no money to file a patent. So he wrote a letter to the man who sold him the fabric, Levi Strauss in San Francisco. He proposed they patent the idea together. On May 20th, 1873, Levi Strauss and Jacob Davis received United States Patent number 139,121 for an improvement in fastening pocket openings. That's the official birthday of blue jeans. Not 1853, not when Strauss arrived in America. The day a pair of work pants became a piece of intellectual property. The first model was called the 20. Later, it would be renamed the 501. The same number stamped on jeans being sold in shopping malls in your city tonight. For the next 50 years, jeans were exactly what they were designed to be. Work clothes. Nothing more. Nothing aspirational. Nothing fashionable. You wore them if you were a miner, a railroad worker, a cowboy, a farmhand, a lumberjack, a factory hand. You wore them because you had to. A respectable man in the 1890s would no more wear jeans into a restaurant than he'd wear his underwear. Jeans were dirty. Jeans were rough. Jeans were lower class. They smelled like sweat and copper and the inside of a coal mine. But out west, something quiet was beginning to shift. The cowboy was becoming a legend. Dime novels, traveling Wild West shows, and the first silent films were turning the American cowboy into a global myth. And the cowboy wore jeans. Buffalo Bill wore jeans. Annie Oakley wore something close to them. Working ranch hands in Wyoming and Montana lived in them. By the 1920s, dude ranches were opening across the American West. Wealthy Easterners and Europeans paid money to play cowboy for a week. They went home with sunburns, stories, and a pair of well-worn jeans they refused to throw away. That was the first crack in the wall. Jeans had stopped being only what poor people wore. They had become a souvenir, a costume, a piece of the romantic American West you could pull on in your living room in New York or London. The fabric of forced labor was becoming the fabric of fantasy. And then came Hollywood. And the wall didn't just crack, it came down. In the 1930s and 40s, Western films exploded in popularity. John Wayne wore jeans. Gary Cooper wore jeans. Every cowboy on every screen in every theater in America wore jeans. A generation of boys grew up wanting to be those men, and those men wore jeans. Then came World War II. American soldiers stationed overseas wore jeans on leave. They wore them in Europe, in Japan, in the Philippines. When they came home, their jeans came with them, softer, faded, broken in by life. And the people they had met across the world had seen them. Foreign teenagers had touched the fabric. They wanted in. But the real explosion came in 1953, a film called The Wild One. Marlon Brando, 29 years old, sitting on a motorcycle in a leather jacket, jeans, and a snarl. A reporter in the film asks his character, "What are you rebelling against?" Brando answers, whatever you got. 2 years later, James Dean wore a red jacket and blue jeans in Rebel Without a Cause. He died in a car crash before the film was even released. His face on a poster, his jeans on his legs, became the symbol of an entire generation that didn't want to be their parents. Suddenly, jeans weren't work clothes anymore. They weren't cowboy clothes either. They were rebel clothes. They were anti-establishment. They were what you wore when you wanted to tell the adult world to go to hell. Schools across America started banning them. By 1957, some districts threatened expulsion if students showed up in denim. Parents wrote letters to newspapers calling jeans a moral threat. Editorials warned that jeans were a slippery slope to juvenile delinquency, and every single ban made jeans more popular. Every single editorial sold 10,000 more pairs. You cannot tell a teenager not to wear something. That is not how teenagers work. By the end of the 1950s, jeans had become the most desirable piece of clothing on the planet, precisely because adults hated them. By the way, if you've made it this far into the history of a pair of pants, you are clearly my kind of person. The kind of person who looks at ordinary things and wonders how they got that way. If that's you, take 1 second to hit subscribe. There are dozens more hidden stories like this one coming, and I'd hate for you to miss them. Now, back to the denim revolution. In the 1960s, jeans became political. Civil rights protesters wore them on marches to identify with sharecroppers and the working poor. Anti-war activists wore them to reject military uniforms. Feminists wore them to reject dresses. Hippies wore them, patched them, embroidered them, painted flowers on them. The same fabric the 1890s had called lower class had become the uniform of a counterculture trying to redesign society from the ground up. In the 1970s, something new happened. Designers got their hands on jeans. Calvin Klein, Gloria Vanderbilt, Jordache. Suddenly there were tight jeans, designer jeans, $100 jeans. The same garment that started life on the legs of broke miners was now being modeled by supermodels in television commercials that scandalized America. The most famous of them all came in 1980. A 15-year-old Brooke Shields stared into the camera and whispered, "You know what comes between me and my Calvins? Nothing." Networks pulled the ad. Sales tripled overnight. The 1980s and 1990s turned jeans into a global currency. In the Soviet Union, a pair of authentic American Levi's could be sold on the black market for more than a month's salary. Smugglers stuffed them in suitcases. Teenagers in Moscow saved for years to own one pair. To wear jeans behind the Iron Curtain was to wear America. It was to wear the idea of freedom, even if you couldn't say the word out loud. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, photographers captured something nobody planned. Almost everyone climbing on top of it, on both sides, was wearing jeans. The single most powerful image of the end of the Cold War, and it featured the work pants of California gold miners. By the 2000s, jeans had achieved something no other piece of clothing in history had ever pulled off. They were worn by every class, every age, every gender, every continent. Construction workers wore them. CEOs wore them. The President of the United States wore them on weekends. Queens were photographed in them. Farmers in Africa wore them. Students in Tokyo wore them. Models in Paris wore them. There are now estimated to be around 2.5 billion pairs of jeans sold around the world every single year. The average American owns 7 pairs. The average person on Earth owns at least 1. No other garment in human history has ever come close. But here's the part that almost nobody talks about. The dark side of the obsession. To make a single pair of jeans takes roughly 2,000 gallons of water. That's enough drinking water for one person for 10 years. Most of that water is used to grow the cotton and dye the denim that distinctive shade of indigo blue. The dyeing process produces toxic runoff. Rivers in parts of China, Bangladesh, and India turn blue downstream from denim factories. Workers in those factories sandblast jeans to give them that fashionably worn look. The sand they breathe in causes a lung disease called silicosis. Some workers die in their 20s, so that a teenager in another country can buy pre-distressed jeans at the mall for $29. The work clothes of the poor became the global obsession of the rich. And somewhere in that journey, the poor started paying the price all over again. Just in a different country, at a different end of the supply chain. Today, the jean industry is worth over $70 billion a year. Sustainable denim, organic cotton, waterless dye, and laser distressing are all trying to fix what nobody thought to question for 150 years. But the demand keeps growing, because we cannot stop wearing them. Think about that for a moment. A pair of pants invented to keep miners' pockets from ripping in 1873 has outlasted empires. It has survived 2 world wars. It crossed the Iron Curtain. It dressed presidents and protesters, billionaires and bus drivers. It conquered every culture it ever touched. Not by force, not by law, by comfort, by accident, by the slow, quiet genius of a fabric that gets better the more you wear it. Jeans aren't really clothing anymore. They're a passport. The one thing you can wear in nearly any country, in nearly any room, in nearly any era of the last 70 years, and not look out of place. They are the closest thing humans have ever made to a universal uniform, and they started with 2 weavers in 2 cities who didn't know each other, an immigrant who didn't know how to sew, a tailor who couldn't afford a patent, and a copper rivet hammered into a pocket corner because some woodcutter's wife was tired of mending the same pair of trousers. That's the hidden history of jeans. From the docks of Genoa to the dye houses of Nimes, from the gold mines of California to the back of Marlon Brando's motorcycle, from the rubble of the Berlin Wall to your closet, right now, tonight. History isn't only in the museums and the textbooks and the marble statues. Sometimes history is in the closet. Sometimes it's lying on the floor where you dropped it last night. If you enjoyed this episode, take a second to like the video, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments which everyday object you'd like me to dig into next. There are more hidden stories coming every week. Next time, we're unraveling the history of something you've held in your hands almost every day of your life and never thought twice about. The hidden history of the wristwatch. Until then, look down, look around. History is on you. History is everywhere.